Okay, while he's getting the, it's Goertz. Well, excuse me, I'm afraid it's, along with the glorious spring, it's also allergy season. So while the PowerPoint's getting set up, I'm Peg Goertz. I'm a professor emerita from the Penn GSE and also a senior researcher at the Consortium for Policy Research in Education, or CPRE. I'm going to be talking this afternoon about the results of a study I conducted with Carol Barnes and Diane Massell at the University of Michigan on how state education agencies, or in shorthand SEAs, acquire and use research in school improvement. I want to thank Elliot Weinbaum, who helped design the study and conducted data in the first year of the study, and Ryan Fink, who conducted data in the second year and also did a lot of the analysis for the study, particularly the social network analyses, and particularly the William T. Grant Foundation that funded us. So while SEAs have long been criticized as fragmented and reactive organizations, there's been very little research into their actual functioning, despite the fact they have major responsibilities for guiding and improving the education system. In particular, while studies exist of how districts and schools use research, we know little about how SEAs search for, select, and use research-based and other forms of knowledge. So our study sought to fill that gap. And while this research was conducted on SEAs, I think you're going to see that there's some parallels and some implications for district central offices as well. And do I just point? Yep. Oh. Okay. I didn't know I want this one. Okay. I want to start by placing evidence use in the larger decision-making context. Carol Weiss, a longtime researcher of knowledge utilization, included this figure in a commentary about research use a few years back. And she made the very important point that research is but one source of influence in policy decisions. So if you can see that box, that cloud called evidence on the far left, it's one of several factors. Excuse me. Other considerations which usually interact with, if not outweigh, evidence include experience and expert opinion, the decision maker's own judgment and values, resources, pragmatics, and political press. And also, as you'll see from the arrows, these different influences often point in different directions. And we saw many of these influences at work as SEA staff use research. Very quickly, we had 3 research questions. How are SEAs organized for managing and using research and other kinds of knowledge? How do SEAs search for, obtain, and incorporate research-based information into policy and practices? And what role does research and other forms of evidence or practitioner advice play in state strategies to improve districts and schools? To answer these research questions, we collected data in 3 SEAs that varied in region of the country, in size, and organizational structure, as well as the state school improvement strategies. We used a mixed method methodology. We did 60 in-depth interviews with high-level SEA staff. We surveyed most of the professional staff in each of the 3 SEAs. We did a web-based survey, and you'll see that was used to do some of our social network analysis. And we developed a conceptual framework that focused on the SEA as a community of user of knowledge for school improvement policies and practices. We looked at how the formal structures of the SEA and its informal structures, or what we call social networks, as well as political and legal contexts and other factors, influence the search and use of research knowledge. There are 2 caveats. It was a purposeless sample, so we can't generalize to other state education agencies, and it focused on school improvement as a way to bound our inquiry. So remember, when I'm talking about these networks and everything, it's around the use of research within an SEA in support of their school improvement practices. It could be if you were looking at teacher evaluation, for example, you might see different kinds of networks evolving. We looked at 3 types and forms of knowledge, and we asked the SEA staff who they turned to both within and outside their agency when seeking first research-based knowledge, and you can see the definitions there, other evidence-based knowledge, and practitioner knowledge, which we defined as the information, beliefs, and understanding of context that practitioners acquire through experience. We also asked respondents about the frequency of these interactions and the perceived influence of the resulting advice on their work. And we used that as a measure of the strength of their connections, or what we call network strength. But the presentation today is going to focus primarily on the network analysis of using research knowledge. So our first finding is that SEA staff actively sought and were receptive to research ideas. Their search was broad, reaching across the SEA and outside their agencies to external sources of research. Their primary source of research advice, however, was within their SEA. 70% of the survey respondents searched internally when seeking research on school improvement. About 55% of the respondents agreed or strongly agreed that their best resources for information were within their agency. And as we'll see in the next slide, the search reached across SEA offices, reflecting the cross-divisional work of school improvement work. Like Chris, this is going to be hard to see on the screen, but I think there's a more brightly colored version within your materials. So we created sociograms that mapped all of the connections or ties in each state's research and other knowledge networks, again, focused on school improvement. And this is an example of State C's research network. And each one of the lines represents a connection between 2 individuals. In other words, person A sought research advice from person B, and each color represents a different department in which that person was located. And so what we see are SEA staff reaching out to colleagues in both their own, the same color, and other different color departments, such as school improvement connecting, let's see if I can get this to work. So school improvement is sort of the green in the middle. They're connecting with yellow, which is people in the superintendent's office. There's a lot of pink up there. Those are folks in the special education office. And curriculum and instruction, which is dark green, and I think, I don't have it in front of me, is sort of around here. And these cross-divisional searches for school improvement information ran counter to the traditional view of SEAs as segmented and siloed organizations. What we saw instead were new ways of doing business, including regular cross-divisional teams, working groups around particular topics, or more informal ongoing conversations. And several factors accounted for this: state and federal accountability policies, efforts to secure federal funding, like pulling groups together to apply for Race to the Top, shortages in SEA staffing. I have to go to the person in the next division because I don't have enough people where I am to help me out. And intentional strategies from SEA leaders or external partners to encourage cross-agency collaborations. You also see some black boxes, mostly around the edge. Let me see if I can get this around here. There are a few in the middle, and those are external partners that they were working with. So going on to external, about 30% of the SEA staff reached out to a broad array of external organizations for research information. And a similar percentage of SEA staff felt that the best resources for information useful to their work could be found outside their agency. There was a large number. The SEA staff who cited an external source of research knowledge for school improvement work named a large number of distinct organizations or individuals. It ranged from 36 organizations in one of our states to 44 in another. And these organizations played several roles. They provided expertise in human capital. For example, in 2 of our states, they were developing a high school initiative. They had nobody in their SEA who had expertise in high schools, and they reached out to the Federal National High School Center and a group in Boston to help them to develop tools to assess whether middle and high school students were at risk of dropping out. They translated, synthesized, and packaged research. And I think you've heard that already from the first 2 speakers. This is really very, very important. They provided access to ready-made or adaptable tools, and they validated the actions that were in step with research and or practices of other states. So just as Chris was talking about the people in Denver looking at what other places were doing, very much the SEA staff wanted to know what are states B, D, and F doing as well. So who were these external sources? They were from several sectors, but particularly government, professional membership organizations, and institutions of higher ed. The federal government category encompassed federal agencies, including several offices within the USED, and federally funded technical assistance centers, such as the comprehensive assistance centers, the regional labs, and other assistance centers that supported the implementation of more targeted programs like IDEA or vocational education. The variation you see across the 3 states reflected to some extent prior partnership histories, the stage and focus of the school improvement work, staff expertise, and access to institutions in the environment. But much of the external search was driven by personal connections and prior work histories. These broad research networks with many singular connections to knowledge sources facilitated the flow of new ideas. I want you to flip to the next slide while I'm talking. You'll get back to the state C sociogram. But while singular connections to knowledge sources dominated internal and external searches, it was a set of influential SEA staff and offices that actually incorporated the research into school improvement strategies. Okay, I've got 2 minutes, so I'm going to make this quick. So going back to state C, you can see basically the dot in the middle is the director of school improvement. One of these was a comprehensive center, another was a professional organization, provided a lot of professional development. And this yellow dot over here was the director, actually the one-person research office that was housed in the superintendent's office, so very tightly collected. But it was this group that basically came together into smaller working groups that interacted frequently to address particular problems of school improvement. They brought the research in. They also brought in those other kinds of evidence and practitioner advice that, so for example, if they had a network of Title I directors or school improvement coaches, they would bring that on-the-ground expertise into those discussions as well. Last finding is that they use that research to inform the design of the school improvement frameworks, indicators, strategy tools, and other forms of assistance. They gravitated to research, and I know Carrie's going to pick up on this, that they perceived as relevant to their context, actionable, feasible, and address problems of policy and practice, which we've dubbed, and others have dubbed, something called research designed for use. So in conclusion, contrary to the unidimensional model of knowledge utilization, where research users are viewed as passive recipients of published research, that is, if you publish it, they will read it. Research use is a multidimensional process in our SEAs. Multiple SEA staff reached out to multiple internal and external sources of research. Incorporating research into policy and practice was often a social process where SEA staff worked with each other, practitioners, and external partners to make sense of research and adapt it to their local context. And key brokers of research inside and outside the SEA facilitated the research search and incorporation process. And decision makers sought and used, quote unquote, research designed for use rather than published academic studies to guide their actions. And while Andy pulls me off the stage, some resources, the policy brief is in your packet. I want to bring your attention to a book. I'm not sure if it's actually out the door yet, and that's one called Using Research Evidence in Education. It's based on a set of research the W.T. Grant Foundation has funded, and it includes several studies at the district level as well, which I know that you'll be interested in. Thank you.